Tyler grabbed a teenage girl's arm, shoved her onto the pavement, then swung a metal grill tool straight toward her head. The entire neighborhood barbecue fell silent. Phones stopped recording. Nobody moved. Standing beside the injured girl was a quiet black widowed father in an old flannel shirt, a man everyone believed was too afraid to fight back. Tyler laughed in his face, called him a coward, and mocked his late wife while the crowd watched without saying a word. But there was one strange detail no one noticed. Before stepping forward, the father calmly folded his flannel shirt and placed it neatly on a table. In less than 60 seconds, every person standing on that lawn would discover they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because the man they dismissed as a weak single father wasn't hiding from conflict. He had spent 16 years leading one of America's most elite military units. If you've ever been judged by appearances or made to feel like you didn't belong, this story is for you. Stay with us until the end, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our next story. 3 years after losing his wife, Damon Carter wanted only one thing: to give his 16-year-old daughter a peaceful life, so he buried every trace of the man he used to be. Believing silence was the only way to protect her, Damon Carter had built a good life out of small things: morning runs before Maya woke up, a vegetable bed that was replanted every spring, a cup of coffee cooling on the porch while Oak Creek came alive around him. Neighbors received a nod, sometimes a wave. Usually that was the whole conversation. To them, Damon was a quiet black single father in his 40s, raising his 16-year-old daughter 3 years after his wife Leah died. He was careful with money, careful with words, and worked some kind of security contract from a home office nobody ever visited. People liked him, but almost nobody knew him. They did not know why he always chose the chair with his back to a wall. They did not know he could take apart and rebuild the lock on his front door faster than most people could find their keys. They did not know he had spent 16 years in the Navy, the last 11 in operations that would never be discussed in public. He had led SEAL Team 7 through 3 classified missions and come home with 2 things: a promise to Leah made in the last weeks of her life, and a discipline so deep that silence had become part of him. Leah had never asked him to pretend his past did not exist. She had asked for something gentler and harder to understand. Make sure Maya grows up knowing you are more than what war made of you. Damon had turned those words into an absolute rule. No stories about his former life. No explanations. No part of himself that might pull Maya back toward the man he had been before Leah got sick. At night, however, he still took secure calls in a voice Maya had never heard in ordinary conversation. He had been appointed lead federal security evaluator for a Department of Defense logistics contract. His job was to assess safety records, compliance history, and whether contractors could be trusted with sensitive shipments. In a locked drawer, he kept a file on a trucking company whose driver had been paralyzed after a brake failure on the highway. The maintenance records were missing. He had a case number, but not yet a company name. He had no idea that company was about to move in next door. The Caldwells arrived on a Thursday with 2 moving trucks and the kind of confidence that seemed to occupy an entire street. Richard Caldwell, who ran Caldwell Freight, introduced himself to every neighbor. His son Tyler was 21, heavily built, a black belt in karate, a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and an amateur MMA fighter with a small sponsor watching his future. Tyler was skilled. Damon could see that within a week. What Tyler lacked was control. Richard had taught him from childhood that Caldwell men did not show weakness. The lesson had produced a young man who knew how to fight, but did not know what to do with anger when there was no cage, no referee, and no applause. Damon decided to stay out of it. For a few weeks, he almost believed that was peace. The first boundary was crossed on a Tuesday afternoon. Maya was washing the car in the driveway, music playing softly, when Tyler walked over, reached through the open window, and turned the volume down himself. He said the noise was interrupting his training. When Maya told him to leave, he snatched her phone and threw it onto the street. Damon saw everything from the porch. He crossed the yard, picked up the phone and handed it back to Maya. Then he faced Tyler. Do not touch anything on this property that belongs to someone else. Apologize to her and do not come back here. Tyler stepped close, using his size the way he used it in a fight. A man who hides in his house has no right to tell anyone what to do. Damon said nothing. He stood there until Tyler mistook that silence for fear and finally walked away laughing with his friends. That night, Maya opened a folder on her phone without telling her father. 6 weeks later, Richard made a casual remark at the back fence about the unfavorable safety finding against Caldwell Freight. Damon's expression did not change, but the case number in his locked drawer aligned in his mind before Richard finished speaking. Richard noticed the smallest flicker, not enough to know for certain, but enough to worry. If the federal evaluator for his company's bid could be provoked into a public confrontation, Any negative decision Damon made could be attacked as biased. Richard did not need Damon gone. He needed Damon to make a witnessed mistake, and he had a hot-headed son ready to help him create one. Soon afterward, Tyler arrived at the Carter property with two gym friends, kicking at the lilac bushes Leah had planted years earlier. Damon calmly told them to leave. Tyler stepped onto the grass, grabbed Damon by the collar, and shoved him backward toward Maya and her friends. What happened next took less than a second. Damon caught Tyler's wrist, turned his hips, and put the younger man on his knees in the wet grass. No punch was thrown, no visible injury remained. The difference in their ability was simply exposed in front of 4 witnesses. Damon released him immediately, made a quiet comment about the slippery ground, and helped him stand as if nothing serious had happened. Tyler said nothing, but his face made a promise. Richard arrived within an hour, threatening lawsuits and city connections. Beneath all the noise, Damon understood the calculation. There had now been enough conflict, enough recorded provocation, enough opportunity to question his professional neutrality. That night, sitting alone on the porch, Damon admitted what he had been avoiding. His silence had not made Maya safer. It had only taught Tyler how far he could push before someone stopped him. The Labor Day barbecue was the one neighborhood event nobody missed. Folding tables filled the shared lawn. Families drifted between grills and dessert trays. Damon took Maya because he wanted one ordinary afternoon, one afternoon where he could simply be her father holding a paper plate beside a cooler. For the first hour, it was almost possible. Maya laughed with friends near the desserts. Damon spoke to a neighbor about a fence post that needed replacing before winter. Even then, he stood near the edge of the crowd with a clear path to the parking lot, a habit formed over 16 years that he no longer tried to fight. Richard arrived in a golf cart carrying imported beer. Tyler followed behind him with gloves already in his hands. His friends came too, phones ready. The crowd felt the change before it understood it. Tyler crossed the grass and threw the gloves at Damon's feet. "You embarrassed me last time," he said loudly. "Today we settle it properly. In public." Phones lifted. Neighbors stepped back from the grills. Damon did not reach for the gloves. He moved sideways, placing himself between Tyler and Maya. "I am not looking for trouble with you," Damon said. "Stay away from my daughter." Tyler laughed for the crowd. Then he spoke cruelly about Leah, a woman he had never met. He told Maya she deserved a father willing to defend his reputation instead of hiding behind useless silence. "You want to teach your daughter that running away is strength?" Tyler shouted. "That is exactly what you are teaching her right now." Richard stood beside his son, nodding now and then. He said he would cover any hospital bills later, as if the afternoon had already been planned down to the final lie. Maya touched Damon's sleeve. "Please," she whispered. "Please do not." Her voice tightened his chest more than Tyler's insults ever could. Damon turned to leave. Walking away still seemed like the safest choice. Tyler interpreted it as surrender. In front of his friends, with a sponsor's name tied to his social media and cameras recording, he could not tolerate it. He grabbed Maya's arm to stop Damon. She stumbled onto the pavement, catching herself with both hands. Skin tore across one palm. Everything Damon had tried to preserve for 3 years broke in that instant. He helped Maya up, checked her hand, and placed her with Diane Whitfield, who had moved in from the edge of the tables. Then he turned toward Tyler. For the first time that afternoon, there was nothing left for him to manage or swallow. "Apologize to her. Leave this barbecue. It ends here if you walk away now." Tyler put on the gloves and looked back to make sure the phones were still filming. Damon took off his flannel shirt, folded it once, and set it neatly on the edge of a table. Then he walked toward the open grass. Tyler opened with a fast combination, hands sharp from thousands of sparring rounds. Damon slipped the first punch and moved into the empty angle beside him. He used Tyler's forward momentum to send him face first into the grass. Some people laughed before they could stop themselves. The sound hurt Tyler more than the fall. He recovered and threw a spinning kick, the kind that looked impressive in highlight videos. Damon read the movement, closed the distance before the kick fully opened, and hooked Tyler's standing leg. Tyler fell a second time. The kick grazed Damon's left shoulder, enough to make him take half a step and make the nearby crowd gasp. No one laughed after that. Damon was not invulnerable. Everyone could see it. He told Tyler to stay down. Tyler lay still for a few seconds, chest heaving, knees scraped from the second fall. For the first time, he seemed to understand that he had misjudged something badly. Then he looked at Richard. Richard shouted from the edge of the lawn, telling him to get up and do whatever was necessary. Tyler rushed forward for a tackle, arms low around Damon's waist. Damon dropped his weight, turned with the force instead of resisting it, and pinned Tyler face down in the grass, trapping both arms where he could not roll or escape. Richard ran toward them, yelling that Damon was hurting his son. In the chaos, Tyler reached with his free hand and grabbed a long metal grill tool. He swung it hard toward Damon. Maya had pulled away from Diane and run toward her father when the shouting grew louder. The bar passed within inches of her and continued toward her head. There was nothing left to weigh. Damon shoved Maya away with one hand and stripped the metal tool from Tyler's grip with the other. It landed far across the grass. Then Damon locked Tyler's arms behind his back until the younger man could not move an inch. When Damon spoke, his voice changed. It was lower, steadier, and completely certain, the voice of a man who had once given orders in places where hesitation cost lives. At the edge of the crowd stood James Whitmore, a retired Navy admiral visiting his son 2 streets away. He had seen the entire incident. "Enough," Whitmore said. The words stopped every conversation on the lawn. Damon released Tyler's wrist, checked that both shoulders could move, and stepped back. His flannel remained folded on the table. The metal bar lay in the grass far from Tyler. Maya came to him with her scraped hand pressed against her side. Neither of them spoke. Richard called the police within minutes. He described an unprovoked attack by a dangerous veteran who had used military training against his unarmed son. When the first officer arrived, he ordered Damon to get on the ground, even though Tyler stood only a few feet away from the metal tool. Diane spoke clearly enough for the officer to hear. The man who pushed his daughter out of the path of that weapon should not be the first person ordered face down on the pavement. The officer hesitated. Diane had video from her porch. Cody Bennett, a teenager near the grill, had filmed from the moment Tyler threw down the gloves. The footage showed Tyler's threats, his grip on Maya, and his reach for the bar. By the time a second officer finished taking statements, Tyler, not Damon, was the one facing a possible charge of assault with a dangerous weapon. Richard stood at the edge of the lawn staring at the officer, unable to understand why the afternoon had not followed the script he had written. 3 things happened in the following week. First came the video, an edited version spread online faster than the Carters could have imagined. It showed Damon's takedowns but cut away Tyler's threats, Maya's fall, and the metal weapon. Then came school. Maya walked into her second-period classroom and saw 3 phones pointed at her before she reached her seat. She said nothing. She spent the day the way she had survived most hard things in life, keeping her face still and waiting for time to move. The third thing was a child services caseworker. She spoke privately with Maya in the living room while Damon waited in the kitchen, fighting the urge to pace. He answered every question calmly and let her walk through the house. After she left, he stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking at Maya's shadow behind the upstairs curtain. He wondered how many years he had mistaken secrecy for protection. To defend himself against the complaint, he had to open a locked drawer he had kept closed for 3 years. One night, he sat at his desk with his old service records in front of him. Commendations and after-action reports written about a man who barely seemed like him anymore. Maya learned about the complaint before he could tell her. She overheard part of a call with his lawyer and understood the rest. That evening, she sat across from him at the kitchen table, her bandaged hand in her lap. "If you had not hidden everything for so long," she said, "maybe people would have known who you were from the beginning. Maybe Tyler would never have gone that far if everyone on this street understood what it took for you to come home to us." Damon had no ready answer. For 3 years, he had told himself silence meant safety. He had believed locking away his history honored what Leah wanted. This time, with no file folder between them, he told Maya the truth. He had misunderstood Leah. She had not wanted him to disappear behind his own silence. She had wanted Maya to know he was more than war had made him. But Damon had turned that wish into a wall instead of a door his daughter could walk through when she needed him. They sat together in the kitchen without speaking, yet the silence between them was different from every silence before it. Outside their house, Richard believed he was still winning. He had learned that Damon was the federal security evaluator assigned to Caldwell Freight's $40 million defense logistics bid. Richard's lawyer urged him to step back. Richard did the opposite. He used his contacts to demand Damon's removal, claiming a man who had attacked his son at a neighborhood barbecue could not review any Caldwell matter fairly. That demand eventually reached James Whitmore, who still advised the department on contractor security and evaluation. Richard did not know Whitmore had been standing 15 feet away on the grass. Whitmore let Richard tell the whole story. He listened as Richard described Damon as unstable, dangerous, and manipulative. He listened to the references to sponsors, city officials, and pressure that could be taken higher if necessary. Then Whitmore spoke. The man Richard wanted removed, he said, was one of the most reliable commanders ever to serve under him. Whitmore had personally approved deployments he was still not allowed to discuss publicly, and he had witnessed the barbecue incident from beginning to end. Trying to pressure a federal evaluator, hide evidence, and threaten witnesses during an active investigation was not a personnel dispute, Whitmore told him. It was a conflict of interest with serious legal consequences. Before the call ended, Whitmore said he would document everything and send it to the department's ethics review office that same afternoon. Within days, Caldwell Freight was suspended from the bidding process pending a full investigation into leadership conduct and the documented safety failures. Damon learned about Whitmore's letter through a colleague. On paper, he had authority to sign Caldwell Freight's disqualification himself. One signature, one afternoon, and the company would be out. But he understood what Richard would say afterward, that a former operator had used federal authority to settle a personal score. Even if the evidence was strong, the appearance of revenge could weaken the result. Sitting alone at his desk, Damon finally recognized something about himself. For 3 years, he had confused control with strength. He would not correct that mistake by choosing another version of the same thing. He withdrew completely from the review, submitted every piece of evidence to an independent panel, and left the decision to people who owed him nothing. Around the same time, Maya made a decision of her own. For weeks, she had saved screenshots of messages Tyler had sent to other kids in the neighborhood, along with videos where he mocked people smaller than him. She brought them to Cody, along with what she knew about the unedited footage his lawyers had failed to erase, because Cody had backed it up somewhere they never thought to look. Together, they gave the complete video and Maya's evidence to local police and to a reporter known for checking facts before publishing. The reporter asked Maya why she had waited so long to speak. For a while, Maya answered, "I thought silence was just what our family did. Then I realized it had never really protected anyone, not even me." Damon learned about it after she had done it. Maya stood in the kitchen, chin lifted, ready for him to be angry that she had acted without warning. He was not angry. He recognized the instinct he saw in her. The instinct to act when action was necessary, instead of standing still forever. It was the same instinct that had carried him through places nobody was meant to know existed. For the first time, he let himself feel proud of it in his daughter. The unedited footage changed everything within days. It showed Tyler reaching for the metal tool and Damon pushing Maya clear. The reporter published the full story, showing that the barbecue was not one bad afternoon, but the end of a long pattern of intimidation. The independent panel reviewed the safety violations, witness pressure, and concealment of evidence. Caldwell Freight was removed from the federal contract and struck from the approved government vendor list. Whitmore called Damon after the decision. He did not congratulate him. He simply said that stepping away from the review had been the right call. That is the judgment that separates a trustworthy commander from a man who only wants the final word, Whitmore said. Tyler was charged with assault with a dangerous weapon. He accepted a plea agreement involving probation, community service, and mandatory anger management treatment. His gym owner, Daniel Cross, gathered the coaches and played the unedited footage before stripping Tyler of his black belt and banning him permanently. Cross told him in front of the younger fighters who had admired him that a fighter who used training to terrorize a child had failed the only test that mattered in that gym. The sponsor withdrew within a week. His friends stopped answering his calls. The attention Tyler had built his identity around disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. The child services file was closed with no further action. Richard's board, facing a federal investigation into safety violations Caldwell Freight had buried for years, voted to force his resignation within a month. His name came off the letterhead. The contract he had risked everything to protect vanished before the new year. Damon did not feel the satisfaction he had expected when it was all over. What remained was quieter than that, warier. The particular weight of seeing a long uncertainty finally end. He called his coordinator and officially returned to work. A few weeks later, on a late autumn afternoon, Tyler appeared at the fence without gloves and without anyone behind him. A moving truck stood in the Caldwell driveway, half loaded. A for sale sign waited in the yard. Tyler looked younger than he had in summer. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and there was no audience left to perform for. Damon set down the pruning shears he had been using and walked over. "Why didn't you break my arm that day?" Tyler asked quietly. "You could have." Damon looked at him for a moment. "I had already won." Tyler did not understand right away. He looked past Damon toward Maya, kneeling nearby with a small shovel and dirt on her knees. Slowly, something real moved across his face. He was only beginning to understand that Damon had never been talking about the fight. Tyler nodded once and walked back toward the driveway. Damon watched him go, then knelt beside Maya. Together, they replanted the lilac bushes Leah had once placed along the fence, the same bushes Tyler had kicked apart in spring. Some branches were bent and broken, but the roots had held. Maya pressed her small shovel into the soil. "Did fighting that day mean you broke your promise to Mom?" she asked. Damon thought before he answered. "I did not fight to prove I was stronger than Tyler," he said. I did what I had to do to protect you. There is a difference. I should have understood it a long time ago. Maya pressed her palm into the earth beside a root they had just covered. I do not need a perfect father, she said. I just need one who does not hide everything from me. Damon had no speech for that. He only nodded. They stayed in the dirt until the street grew quiet and the sky turned dark. Their hands rested on the same patch of ground. The lilacs stood a little straighter than they had months before, and new buds were beginning to rise from the damaged branches. Most real changes happen quietly.